And now I have the really great honour to introduce our special guest speaker, internationally renowned author and social commentator, Hugh Mackay, to deliver our inaugural oration. Please welcome Hugh Mackay.
Thank you very much, Catherine, and good morning, everybody. It's a great honour to be part of the 90th birthday celebrations of the Foundation. It won't have escaped your attention that it's become fashionable to say of philanthropy that it will make you feel good. You'll be helping people in need of support, but you'll also be helping yourself because of the thrill, the kick that philanthropists get from generous gestures. Well, that might be true, but I want to challenge that idea this morning and to suggest at the beginning that it's a bit like saying that we should go out wandering down Swanston Street in search of frail elderly people who may wish to cross the road, so that we'll feel better by being able to help them across the road, or that we might jump off the St Kilda pier to assist a drowning child in the hope of winning a bravery medal. What I want to suggest is that virtue really is its own reward, and that if we understand what goodness is, what a good life is really about, we would also understand that it has absolutely nothing to do with feeling good. It has nothing to do with promoting our personal happiness. But we live in a period in our social evolution when the pursuit of happiness has become a kind of obsession, not just in Australia, but around Western societies. And so even philanthropy, that noble, pure, altruistic, essentially selfish act that wonderful people through history have always performed, even that is being recruited in this mad pursuit of personal happiness. So I want to really begin by saying that I think the pursuit, by the way, I should declare I'm not against happiness. I enjoy being happy, I like people to be happy. It's the pursuit of personal happiness that's getting me deeply worried. It seems to me that the pursuit of happiness has become perhaps the greatest of all the distractions, and there are many other distractions, but the pursuit of happiness perhaps the greatest of all distractions from the good life. Am I happy? We're constantly asking ourselves, am I happy enough? Why aren't I feeling happier than this? Aren't I supposed to be happy? Isn't happiness supposed to be a sign or a symptom of the good life? Well, of course we ask ourselves questions like that occasionally, maybe once or twice a year. It does no harm to reflect on the emotional state you happen to be in, and to ask yourself why you're feeling the way you're feeling and whether that's helpful or unhelpful in understanding yourself. But to become obsessive about the quest for a particular emotional state called happiness is really to miss out on a deeper sense of what it means to be human, but also to miss out on some of the greater thrills that are available to human beings. As it's popularly defined, and of course the definition is everything, but as it's popularly defined, happiness is just one emotional state among many, and yet we talk at the moment as though it's the sovereign emotional state, as though this is the one to which we should give exalted status. This we should regard as the default position for human beings. So if you're not feeling happy, that means there's something wrong, and you'd better rush off to a weekend workshop and figure out how to recover your sense of happiness. Well, there are some pretty obvious problems, aren't there, with this idea that we ought to be pursuing personal happiness. One problem with it is that it's actually a pretty easy quest. If you really were determined to be happy, Well, there are all kinds of people out there who are in the business of manipulating emotions, and you can go to the appropriate movie or play the appropriate song if you want to get a bit of a kick or if you want to have a bit of a weep. There are preachers, there are politicians, there are parents, there are lovers, there are filmmakers, there are composers, performers, actors, all these people who are in the business of manipulating our emotions, and they do it extremely well. So, of course, does the entire commercial marketing industry. And if none of that works for you, well, you have an entire pharmacological industry at your disposal, drugs, licit and illicit, available to create whatever emotional state you would like to be in. So it's not hard. If that's all you're after, well, go for it. The other problem, though, with the pursuit of happiness is that it ignores the fact that as humans, one of the great blessings we have is this extraordinary spectrum of emotions that are available to us, that provide us with a kind of running commentary on our lives, that tell us how we're responding to what's happening to us, and perhaps even tell us what we might learn from what's happening to us. And the point about the spectrum is that every point on the spectrum only makes sense in the context of the whole spectrum. How could you possibly talk about happiness if you hadn't been visited by sadness? How could you talk about triumph if you hadn't experienced loss and disappointment? You can't make sense of any point without referring to the context that it's set within. But because we're in this strange period where we think happiness is the special emotion, we're inclined now to fear some of the other points on the emotion. We're so conscious of the fact that Western society is suffering from an epidemic of depression, which is true, that we become afraid even of sadness and think we've got to get rid of this in case it's an early sign that we're about to be plunged into bleak despair. Well, this is crazy. Most of us are never going to experience the depths of so-called clinical depression, but all of us will experience the depths of sadness and frustration and disappointment and loss. And hasn't our folklore always told us the opposite of what the happiness industry is telling us at the moment, which is that we grow through pain? Haven't we always told each other and perhaps our children that adversity is the great teacher? Don't we know that we learn more from losing than we do from winning? Don't we understand that the so-called dark emotions have more to teach us? The others are fun. We enjoy them. Who doesn't like a little burst of bliss or euphoria, a fleeting moment of joy? But what do we learn from that compared with what we learn from the darker passages of our lives? I'm sure you remember the experience of James Magnussen, the Australian champion swimmer, who at the London Olympics failed so spectacularly in the heat of the men's relay in front of a global audience. International humiliation. And you may also recall what Magnussen said the day after that failure in the pool. He said that he had learned more about himself in those 24 hours than he had in the previous 20 years. Which does not, of course, mean that we should wish sadness or loss on ourselves or on our children. Only a particular kind of neurotic goes around searching for trouble in the hope perhaps that they'll be taught some bitter lesson from the experience of trouble. Of course we don't seek it. We don't have to seek it. We know it will come, and we know it will come to our children and perhaps our grandchildren. Which is why I get a bit anxious when I hear parents, particularly parents of young children, saying, as they almost all do, and I'm sure I did, I just want my kids to be happy. Now, you wouldn't expect parents to say, I just want my kids to be sad, but I just want my kids to be happy is a very odd thing for parents to say. Of course, we have to ask them, what they mean by happiness. Are they drawing, when they say that, are they drawing on ancient Greek wisdom? Aristotle had a lot to say about a concept captured in the Greek word eudaimonia, which is popularly translated as happiness. But when you read what Aristotle said about eudaimonia, he didn't mention our emotional state. It was nothing to do with feeling good. His concept of happiness, or eudaimonia, was to do with living virtuously, living in accordance with our sense of purpose, being fully engaged with the life of the community, being prepared to make sacrifices for the common good. And one of the phrases I love best in Aristotle's description, experiencing the full richness of human love and friendship. Well, anyone in the auditorium who's experienced the full richness of love, of human love and friendship, knows that that isn't all sweetness and light. That human love and friendship brings pain, brings disappointment, sometimes brings loss. So when you hear parents say, I just want my kids to be happy, you could say, you have the Aristotle concept in mind, do you? You just want your kids to be prepared to make sacrifices for the common good, etc. No, that isn't what they mean. What they mean is they want their kids to be in a positive frame of mind. They want their kids to be always up. They want their kids to be cheerful. And if their kids are sad, they're saying, come on, cheer up, give us a smile, as though we have nothing to learn from this moment of sadness. Surely it would be smarter for us to be wishing wholeness for our kids, for us to be introducing them to this spectrum of human emotions so they can learn to recognise them as they are visited by these emotions, and also learn how to deal with them and what to learn from them. In other words, wouldn't it be better to be wishing resilience for our children rather than just happiness? In any case, we all know what it means, what it feels like to be just happy. I'll bet everyone present has been through phases of your life when you were just happy. It's called falling in love. It usually lasts somewhere between 6 months and 2 years, this rosy, glowing feeling that the world is a wonderful place. That's just happy. And when people are in love, of course, they are effectively dysfunctional. When you're in that's when you crash into things. That's when you lose the car keys. That's when you make appalling misjudgments about all sorts of things, especially each other. I attended a conference a couple of years ago at which an American psychologist said to us, next time you go to the doctor, before the doctor attempts a diagnosis, give your doctor a piece of chocolate, so the doctor will get a little sugar hit and a little burst of euphoria, and you'll get a better diagnosis. I thought, could this possibly be true? I'm aware of all the research about the relationship between food and mood. I mean, that's another way of manipulating our emotions. Have a good lunch and the world will look terrific for a while. There's some disturbing research recently published in the UK about a parole board comparing the decisions made by the parole board before and after lunch. I'm sure you can guess the outcome. The prisoners who were before the board after lunch got much more generous and lenient treatment than those in the morning. So if you're ever in that situation, do try to get an afternoon appointment. But anyway, contradicting what this doctor had said, I came across recently some research by Professor Joe Forgas in the University of New South Wales. And Forgas has been studying the relationship between our mood and our cognitive function, the quality of our decision making and so on. And he says we make our best decisions when we're feeling slightly unhappy. So on reflection, I thought I wouldn't be giving the doctor a piece of chocolate. I'd rather perhaps tell her a sad story so she was feeling slightly unhappy before she attempted her diagnosis. Well, the happiness thing has got completely out of control. Happiness is one of a cluster of key words that really point to a contemporary disease that has us in its grip, a disease which I call the Utopia Complex, the idea that some kind of utopia is available to us on earth, where we will be happy, where our self-esteem will be towering, where everything will be excellent, Notice, I'm delighted to see that the Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation does not have as its slogan, excellence in charity, but almost everything is excellence. The local primary school, the local car sales yard, they're all centres for excellence in something. And I wouldn't expect them to say they were centres for mediocrity, but we all do our best, and occasionally what we do turns out to be excellent. Even perfection. Notice how the pursuit of perfection is now presented to us as though we're all marching into this fabulous future. Our banners triumphantly aflutter. Perfect teeth. Great time to be an orthodontist when a community is in the grip of the Utopia Complex, when everyone thinks their teeth should be gleaming white and straight, regardless of how many years they've spent chewing and smiling. No, perfect teeth, perfect skin. Get into the cosmetic surgery business if you want to make a killing at the moment. The perfect latte, I'm sure you know where the perfect latte is. Perfect kids, of course, they all have to be gifted and talented. Perfect sex, perfect marriages. If they're imperfect, we'll ditch them. About 40% of contemporary marriages will be ditched for their imperfections. But then we'll have a perfect divorce, of course, and have another go. Outcomes are always positive in this utopian world. Well, our language has come to reflect this hyped up view of the world. Everything is fabulous, everything is fantastic. I signed a credit card voucher in a restaurant a couple of weeks ago. The waiter watched me signing my name and he said, "Fantastic." I looked at what I'd written and I thought, what is fantastic about that? It's legible, that's perhaps unusual, and I didn't go below the line, but fantastic, no, everything's fantastic. We used to say to people on Friday afternoon, have a good weekend. Now, have an awesome weekend. And if you were just planning to curl up with a good book and fill the time in, that won't do. On Monday morning you'll have to have an awesome weekend story. Well, we can laugh at ourselves about all this utopian madness. We can look in the mirror and say, you're crazy. Perfection is not available and you're not going to be happy all the time and not everything you do is going to be excellent. So we can mock ourselves, give ourselves a reality check, but there are victims of the culture that we live in at the moment, in which we've made an obsession of the pursuit of happiness and of this whole utopian thing. And the victims are, of course, our kids. What is it like to be growing up at a time when, as a child, you're going to be told from the very beginning that you're special, that excellence is a possibility, even perfection is a possibility. What is it going to be? What is it going to be like for children who grow up being constantly praised, getting prizes for everything, prizes for turning up, gold stars for breathing? This has gone berserk. I spoke to someone recently who'd just been to a 7-year-old's birthday party, said everyone got a present for coming to the party. I assume the child in question got a present too. They played Pass the Parcel, and of course the parent was monitoring the music and making sure every child got a turn, and every time a layer of the parcel was unwrapped there was a prize. Now, some of you are old enough to remember when the only prize in Pass the Parcel was from the last layer, but you can't have disappointed kids. In a world in which pain must be avoided and disappointment must be avoided, everyone must be a winner. I guess they've given up musical chairs. It would be hard to imagine how you would play musical chairs without actually taking chairs away, and that would involve disappointment. Well, I drove past a primary school in New South Wales a couple of months ago, and there was a sign. Well, all primary schools now, of course, have signs out the front to inspire us. This one said, "Every child in this school is extraordinary." And I thought, well, we've just redefined the meaning of extraordinary. Extraordinary now means ordinary, and I suppose if you actually are a bit above the average, you're awesome. But what a burden to lay on a school full of kids, to tell them that they're all extraordinary. What's going to happen? Well, we know what's going to happen because it's happening. We're already seeing the first crop of adolescents coming out of this obsession with the utopian idea of everything is excellent, everyone's special, happiness is our birthright, etc. And the answer is that many adolescents experience periods of deep self-doubt, even depression, as a direct result of having hyped up expectations of what life should be like. A wonderful article appeared in The Atlantic at the end of last year, written by an American psychologist, psychotherapist. And the article was entitled "How to Land Your Kids in Therapy." And what she was saying was what I've just been saying. She said, just keep hyping them up, keep raising their expectations, keep telling them they're special, they can do anything, they can be anything, and the result is they will have to face a reality check which will be disappointing and perhaps painful and perhaps even traumatic. Martin Seligman, the apostle of the positive psychology movement, really, the author of Learned Optimism, an extremely good book, by the way. But Seligman's latest research has pointed to the fact that the pursuit of self-esteem has been a serious wild goose chase. He's saying, if you're looking for the thing that will predict all-round success in high school, it won't be self-esteem, it will be self-control. The ability to discipline yourself, the ability to postpone gratification, to make sacrifices, etc. That will be the best predictor of all-round high school success. And that's part of a cluster of bits of research now emerging in this field, suggesting that we've got it wrong. That in our mad pursuit of happiness, in our mad pumping up of self-esteem in children, we have really missed out on a crucial point about the richest meaning of human, the richest source of gratification and satisfaction in our lives, which is that we will have a sense of meaningfulness which will be unrelated to our emotional state at any given moment. Interesting piece of research from Daniel Gilbert, a Harvard psychologist, looking at this difference between meaningfulness and happiness, etc. And Gilbert reported quite an amusing finding that parents typically report that they are happiest when they're not with their kids, when they're off having dinner together or playing golf or going to a movie or something. That's when they're at their happiest. But the richest source of meaningfulness in their lives is their parenting, when they're with kids. And if you're not a parent, you could make the same comparison, I'm sure, in relation to work. For most people, work, we don't normally skip to work on a Monday morning singing merry songs about the joys of the workplace. We go to work because we want to earn a living. But work may not make us happy, but most people who have paid employment or any employment regard that work as a primary source of meaningfulness in their lives. Well, that's enough about happiness and self-esteem and excellence and perfection. If the good life is not about any of that, what is it about? When people say the good life, they often mean it in an economic sense, don't they? They say the good life is a life of material comfort or prosperity. I'm going to cash in my super and retire to the coast and live the good life. Well, I'm not suggesting that meaning. And obviously I'm not suggesting the emotional meaning that people sometimes attach to the term the good life, as though it's to do with how good you're feeling. What I'm saying is much simpler than any of that. I'm simply saying that the good life is a life characterised by goodness, a life devoted to the common good, a morally praiseworthy life. And so the first step on the pathway to the good life is to acknowledge this central truth. And I think in the context of an audience like this, I scarcely even need to spell it out. But the central truth is that the good life is the life lived for others. Now, I don't put that forward as an opinion. I don't make it as an assertion for us to consider. it's something that we can logically prove if you accept my first premise, which simply is that the source of goodness in human life, the wellspring of all the things that we call good, things like kindness, compassion, respect, inclusion, tolerance, all of those things come from what we might describe as the loving disposition. And I'm using love here not in the emotional sense, but in the motivational sense, a loving or charitable disposition towards other people. So the first premise is that love, charity, the loving disposition, is the prime source of goodness. The second proposition is that you can't have a loving disposition, you can't behave in a charitable way all on your own. It's not something you can do in an empty room. It's something that involves engagement. You have to be doing it with someone. Love, in the motivational sense, is about relationships, networks, communities, about answering a need in someone else. So that leads us to the absolutely inexorable third step, the conclusion, which is that if love is the ultimate source of goodness, and if love is about giving and receiving, if love is about engagement, then the good life is also, of course, going to be about engagement. And what else could it be about? That wouldn't come as a shock, would it, to anyone in the room, that the good life is about engagement with other people, about responding to the needs of other people? We know that this is who we are. The thing we're constantly being told about humans is that the real truth about us is we are selfish, we're driven by self-interest, we're competitive, we're ruthless, give us a chance and we'll be aggressive and even violent. And of course that's true, but there is a much deeper truth about humans which is often overlooked in the public debate about human nature. The deepest truth about us is that we are a cooperative species. The deepest truth about us is that we like to live in communities. Look how we do live. Look at our cities, our suburbs, our towns, our villages. We live cheek by jowl because we choose to. We cooperate. The deepest truth about us is not that we are selfish, but that we are selfless, that we will make sacrifices in the interests of the common good, that the most important question we can ask ourselves is not who am I, but who are we? Carl Rogers, a famous American psychotherapist, said towards the end of his career that when his clients came to a full understanding of who they are, it was always that they were not individuals, but that they belonged somewhere. They were part of a network, a family, an organisation, a neighbourhood, or a community. Which is why it comes naturally to us to behave heroically when we're called upon to do so. Which is why it comes naturally to us, if we're wealthy, to be generous towards those who are not. Which is why it comes naturally to us to help the frail old person across Swanston Street, not so we'll feel good, but because that's the way human beings are. And if you think this is all sounding too idealistic, then let's just take a biological evolutionary approach to the argument and say human beings are by nature social creatures like many other creatures. We hunt in packs, we're herd animals, we're tribal by nature, which means that we depend on communities to sustain us. But the beautiful symmetry about the human condition is that the communities we depend on to sustain us don't just happen, and they don't necessarily survive. They have to be nurtured. And so while we're using the community to sustain us, the community is depending on us to nurture it. How do we nurture communities? I don't even have to say it, do I? We nurture communities by responding to what every religious and philosophical tradition that's ever had anything to say about a moral code or an ethical framework has always said, and that is, we must treat other people the way we ourselves would like to be treated. That's how we nurture the communities that sustain us. So if you're interested in living the good life, don't worry too much about how you're feeling moment to moment. Certainly don't worry too much about how much stuff you've accumulated. Don't waste another minute exploring the meaning of life with a capital L. Focus instead on the meaning of your own life. Focus on the question of whether you gave someone your undivided attention when they needed it. Focus on whether you apologised quickly or sincerely enough when you hurt or offended someone. Amazing how many people in our community have made almost an article of religious faith that they will never apologise. Apology is the great sign of our engagement with the community, the great sign that we're prepared to take other people seriously. Focus on whether you were generous enough in your forgiveness of someone who wronged or offended you. Focus on whether you were there when someone needed your encouragement or support. The greatest monument to any of our lives will not be in stone or in plaques on buildings or any of the other things we may do in response to generous philanthropy, but the greatest monument always will be in our living legacy, the influence we've had on other people at every connection with the human family. You don't have to be rich to leave a positive legacy. You don't have to be intelligent. You don't have to be famous. You don't have to be organised. You certainly don't have to be happy. You only need to treat people the way you yourself would like to be treated, with kindness, compassion, respect, knowing they will have been enriched by their encounters with you. Thank you.